All right, listeners, welcome to another episode of the Banquet Hall podcast. People watching on video, I might notice I have a different background. I know it's blurry, but those of y'all who really pay attention, it's a different background because this is the first podcast being recorded in Los Angeles, California. The Banquet Hall is no longer a San Diego podcast, but that doesn't mean you can't get great San Diego stories. Today, I am lucky to be joined by Ebony. Ebony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing well. I usually have some type of tea going at the beginning of the episode. That's how you know it's going to be a good episode. Today I have blackberry sage tea, which is actually a tea that my dad put me on. I forget the exact brand, but it said it's like a tea of wisdom. I'm like, I want some wisdom in my tea this morning.
I like that. I like that. Come on, wisdom. Let's go.
Yeah, and like I feel like sage is very appropriate to be a tea of wisdom, and then a blackberry just it brings it all together like perfection.
I'm gonna have to get some of that.
Hey, I love putting people onto teas. I'll send you a picture of it afterwards because, as you know, as a tourist, I gotta get my flavor profile right in the morning to set the good intentions for today.
Okay. I love that.
So for today, usually start these podcasts off with a random icebreaker question. So as I stall slightly and try to think of a random icebreaker question, I want to remind new listeners to follow the podcast at Banquet Hall Pod. I know many of y'all come to hear Ebony's story, but make sure y'all tune in for other stories as well. And before we started recording, we were talking about traveling and where we might want to live. And so the random icebreaker question I have for you, Ebony, and please feel free to take as much time as you need, but what are a few elements that your dream house has to have? Whether it's stuff that's inside the house, the environment, what does your dream house have to have? And it can be like a few things, budget things if you got it all, but what's a few things it has to have?
A few things that it has to have. My dream house would definitely, I don't think it would have a few things, but I know it would have to have one specific thing. And that would be a space for me to just kind of go to just relax. Um, okay, I guess there is a few things. Like I want whatever space that I end up being in to just feel cozy, to feel relaxing, to feel like my own personal safe haven. Um, Definitely a lot of good music, a lot of good candles,
Mm.
um, and just good good lighting. I think that's super helpful for me specifically because that seasonal depression kicks in sometimes and can't have that. So yeah, just good lighting and yeah, that would be I would need.
Set the scene for us. What's the first scent you're lighting in your dream house? You get the keys to your brand new house. You have this candle. What scent is it like? Oh, I gotta light this scent. Do you have a favorite candle scent?
So one of my really good friends from grad school gave me this candle for one of my birthdays, and it was like something I think it was called like cozy sweater or something like this. And the smell, it was just I don't even know. I have it in my bathroom. I have to find it. But like it's really, really good. And that brand, shout out to you for making it because I'm definitely gonna.
Yeah, we definitely love a good candle. My cousin, she has a candle business, and we were just talking about like different scents that she has. Like she has like a Black Excellence candle. It's like it was all a dream or something like that. So I really love these very black ass like candle scents because like yeah, I want my room to smell like Black Excellence.
Yes. Okay. Again, recommendation. Give it to me. Send it
Yep.
over.
Hey, Stash Candle Co. If y'all want to support my cousin's candle business, I know a lot of my listeners already got some of those candles, but Stash Candle Co. StashCandleCo.com. You can get a bunch of candles. They also on Amazon, but I would buy from directly from the website. Support your small local businesses. She got a pink mimosa scent. She got a church candy scent that a lot of people like. And once again, like it's real black, like church candy, like that's something that you kind of want in your life.
I don't know why my brain immediately went to like your grandma's bag and having the kids. That's cute. I love that.
That's where we at. But let's go ahead and get started. Well, actually, before we get into the question, I guess I should give thing about my dream house. I've been told I have a very extra vision of a dream house, and I completely own that. Like, I want my vision of my dream house to be nice and extra. It got to have a movie theater. I think that's first and foremost. It has to. Like, we're talking dream house. It has
Yes.
to have a movie theater. Like, I need to have the best like couch that's like perfectly in the center, perfect sound system. Because when y'all come over to Kyler's house for movie night, I want it to be an elite experience. Y'all gonna have to leave afterwards, so we're not gonna watch too many movies, but I want it to be like the perfect movie theater experience. Has to have some type of pool. Like, I love being in the water. I love swimming.
Mhm.
Um, and definitely like I want the right level of natural lighting to the house. I would definitely vibe with that. Like, you just want spaces in your house that put you in that relaxed state of mind, like you said. So I would want an area where if I want to like crack open a book or if I want to listen to a podcast, drink some tea, like I can have this area that has natural lighting, some type of greenery, be able to see outside. Lighting is definitely important, but if we talk in dreams, it got to start with a movie theater.
Come on now. And what would be the movie that would probably be most played in the theater?
Oh, most played. That's a good question. See, I was prepared for you to ask me like what would be a movie, but the most played movie? That's an excellent question. I'm gonna have to think on that. I'm gonna make a note to myself by the
Okay.
end of the podcast. I will give you the most played movie because I'm too much of a cinema head to where like I'm really going through the list. Because there's movies that I'm like, oh, this is just an excellent movie that's gonna be played a lot. But you know those guilty pleasure movies, those movies is like, nah, like I just love this movie. I don't care if anybody likes it or not. Because the first movie that came to mind was Transformers. I'm not even gonna lie.
Okay. All right.
Because I'm thinking like big theater, nice sound. I need something loud, something with action, something that little Kyler will be like, man, you made it. I think that's what I want it to feel like. When I think about all the dreams I've had of a dream house, I want whatever movies played the most to be like, yeah, like you could just go in your basement and play Transformers whenever you want.
Mama, we made
Mama,
it.
we made it. But listeners, I'll make the Spotify question for this episode similar to that. So let us know in the comments, y'all dream house, things y'all want to have in your dream house, and bring all the extra outness. If you need ice sculpture of yourself that is made every single day in your dream house, I'm with it because I want us to dream lavishly.
Um,
But let's go ahead and get started with the first formal question of the podcast. Ebony, where are you from and how did that shape who you have become in your life or are just in the process of becoming?
okay. Um, so where I'm from is a little complicated. I was born in Connecticut. So I lived there for the first 7 years of my life, but then from basically 7 to 18, I moved from like probably between like 7 to 8 different states.
Oh, wow.
Mm, and so I feel like growing up in that much variety, it was kind of like a double-edged sword. So it shaped who I became in the sense of like positives. I learned how to listen. I learned how to really observe people, just a large variety of people. And I got to learn different ways of doing things, of communicating, of just navigating the world a little differently. Um, but I think that the opposite of that would be that I didn't really feel as connected to people. So I understood them, but I also didn't feel felt, if that makes sense. Because it was kind of like, well, I don't really know when I'm going to leave, so I don't really feel like I need to get too rooted or caught up in this connection because I don't know if I'm going to see you tomorrow. Um, so that was something that I had to learn and unlearn, um, and just learn how to connect with a little bit differently. And how it shaped who I'm becoming, I
Mhm.
think kind of going back to that piece of being able to observe and understand, but also be aware of the fact that I know that sometimes I have trouble connecting or feeling as connected with others, that it makes me more aware to be it makes me more aware of the value of the connections that I hold, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think hearing that makes me honored to be a person you've connected with in your life too. I'm like, dang, like part of that connection. And I think as we look back on like moving and switching locations and whatnot, obviously I just finished moving. Uh those connections that you make and the value in the people that we've crossed paths at a specific moment in time. Like there could have been one single decision, kind of like that butterfly effect, like these singular decisions that would lead to you not connecting with people. And like you say, you just never know when people are going to be leaving your life. So yeah, Connecticut. I don't know if I knew that about you, that you were originally from Connecticut.
No. Well, it's funny because I feel like if I tell anybody generally, like I would say like my home base is in Florida because that's where I spent most of my high school
Mm.
years. It's just easier to say that to people, right? But like if I tell them like, oh, I've lived like 7 different places, then that turns into a whole thing, and I always feel like,
I feel
and
that.
that is why we are friends because you get.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we not finna go through my whole family story right now for the sake of this conversation. Especially if, like, I know you. Especially if you know you're not gonna talk to that person ever again. Like, yeah, I'm from Florida. Because what you gonna do about it?
Nobody's gonna know.
Nobody's going to know at all. But I have to ask, especially like I feel like through this podcast, I'm getting to know where a lot of my friends are actually from because once again, it's when they actually know I'm interested in the actual story. What's Connecticut like? Like you talking to city boys over here, like LA and San Diego all my life. So what is Connecticut like?
You know, Connecticut is. I'll say this: it depends on where you go. I like when I was young back in the 90s, like there were different areas like New Haven, Waterbury, different parts of Connecticut that were a little bit more rough. Um, and that was part of the reason why, like, my mom, she had me in New Haven, but then she moved to the suburbs so that I could live a safer life. Um, that was a good try. Uh, shout out to you, mom. Love you. Um, and generally speaking, like it was very white in the neighborhood that I grew up in, you know. Um, but danger's everywhere, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when you say that it was very white. Like I think whenever if just hearing Connecticut, I just assume everybody's literally white in Connecticut.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
that's not
that's
accurate, but that's what it feels like.
common misconception, you know, and it's okay. I feel no need to contest. It's very white.
But it's just so cool when you get to meet people from different places who have walked different paths of life because I think especially being from a big city like LA, you have this very like myopic individual perspective of like, oh, everything is Los Angeles, like nothing else exists. Especially, I feel like that's California in general. People don't think any other part of the world exists. But even one time, I was in the San Diego airport, and me and this dude were about to board this flight, and it was running late, so he was making small talk. And he was like, "Yeah, we're from Montana." I was like, "Oh wow!" Like, just the concept of standing next to someone from Montana was just like otherworldly to me. It's like you're from Montana. That's so cool.
You know what's really interesting is I feel like that's kind of how I think everybody, at least in my experience, that's kind of how everybody sees their space, right? And even when I think about when I was living on the East Coast, I remember hearing like people say like I'll tell them, oh, like I'm going to California to see my family or going to California to do whatever. And people would be like, oh my God, you're going to California? Oh my gosh, that's so cool. It's that newness, man.
Yeah, it's that newness that it's just like, oh wow, like this brand new experience. And as you might remember, I used to work in college admissions, and so I got to travel to Atlanta for work. And after a while, I started to get a feel for like, oh yeah, I'm talking to people from Atlanta and got to know what they know about California and what they don't know about California. And one of the things that I just saw people's eyes like was like, oh, like what is the ocean like? I'm like, dang, you've never seen the ocean before
Hmm.
because you're like, especially Atlanta's in northern Georgia, of course, or at the northern part of Georgia, so you're far from the ocean. And I'm like, yeah, like I pass by it most days without even a thought.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very interesting. That was something that I used to get excited about every time I used to come out here when I was a kid. Like, I want to go to the beach. Ah! Now I live here. I've been living here for the last 10 years. Like, I'm like, oh, we're going to the beach. Okay. It's dusty out there.
Not as dusty out there. That's hilarious. But we've already alluded to kind of our shared introverted experiences and like kind of knowing how each other are as a pillar of our friendship. One, do you remember when we first met or circumstances around when we first met? I was trying to think of it when I was recording a podcast. Like I know the period of time, but I was wondering if you actually know like when we first crossed paths.
When I saw that question, I was like, shit. I feel like there was just a time when you weren't here, and then a time when you were, and you were just like best friend right there. That's it. I don't really know how we meet. I just know who we met through. So we
Yeah.
met through Ronnie, right? And I remember because I remember seeing you for the first time, but I don't remember our first direct interaction. I remember you and Ronnie did the brother poem, and I was like, Ronnie, who is that? Like, what? Why y'all are dope? Like, what's going on here? And then I remember, just like back in the early days of Black expression, and you getting up and doing your individual poems, and I was just like, he is a deep thinker. And why do I feel like he's living inside of my head? And it's really like you don't need to say that all out. Like you can just tone that down, relax.
Letting out all the secrets.
Why? Why do you know this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, as the person performing some of those things, I'm like, nobody in this audience knows what I'm talking about. Y'all don't be here. Y'all not with me.
No. True mirror over here. I was like, wow. I'm 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 bothered, but I'm also very excited and I'm also emotional. Like, sir, stop this.
And isn't that just the power of like an open mic, and especially as more introverted people? Because I think that explanation of how our lives became intertwined is such an introverted thing, where it's like, hey, they get it, but
Mm.
at some point we just know we've been in each other's space so often where it's like, yeah, like I can strike up a conversation with Ebony. That's friend, that's Ebony. But when we first were like, hey, I'm Kyler, I'm Ebony, beats me.
It's fine.
It's completely fine. But how would you define our relationship for listeners? This is a new question I'm kind of working out just because I feel like through recording these podcast episodes, I'm realizing that a lot of the fun moments for people listening are just hearing like pod friendly Kyler stories. Like people get to know me through my relationships with other people. So, what is our friendship like? And obviously, the poetry stories come to mind, but are there any other pod friendly Kyler stories that come to mind?
um, I will say I feel like our friendship has been hmm, how would I describe it? It's been one of those things, it's been one of those relationships that like not a whole lot has been said, but every time that we have something to say, it lands
Mhm.
very well and it doesn't go away. Like it's like, no, 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 I actually really fuck with the way that you see things. And yeah, you can be around. I like you around. You just
Precisely.
stay here. And I will say this, like I'm one of those folks who like suffers from a lot of like social anxiety in different spaces and things like that. So it was always really comforting and very safe for me to just know that you were in the room. And like it was just like, okay, well, it's gonna be fine.
I
You don't have to
appreciate.
talk to everybody. It's gonna be okay. I feel like in a lot of ways you just gave me permission to not speak if I didn't feel comfortable.
Hey, that's the most affirming thing I've heard on this podcast because I think that is my life like mission. I want all the people who just don't feel like talking in these chaotic ass social spaces to be comfortable. Like, hey, I'm cool back here. Y'all do y'all. I'm cool.
Yeah, yeah. And I love the fact that you went ahead and did this, just created this space to be able to, even though you are introverted, like you do so well with creating space for people to actually speak and giving them that platform to
Mm.
do that. So thank
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's still weird to me sometimes that I'm like hosting these things or being able to be a podcast host, even hosting Black Expression sometimes
you.
people it's I feel like there's a point in time prior to me hosting Black Expression after where everybody before they're like, oh yeah, that's the introvert, he does an introvert poem, like introvert. Now people have no idea I'm introverted. They'd be like, you're not introverted. I'm like, yes, I am. Like, oh, but you do so well hosting. I'm like, yeah, I'm good at things, but I'm an introvert.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like introvertedness is like one of those things where it doesn't automatically mean that you're shy, right?
Right.
It's like that place of like, where do you feel the most comfortable? And if you feel the most comfortable observing and listening, then that's one thing. I think that people mix the two of like, are you introverted or are you shy? And like, you never strike me as a shy person. You strike me as a person like, I just don't want to talk to you. Just not interested.
Feel too seen right now. And that's the crazy thing. Like, if you ask anybody in my family growing up, I was definitely the shyest person. And I feel like life experience and going to UCSD brought me out of that shyness, or at least more comfortable to like try to overcome it in moments when I feel it. Because definitely still have a lot of that social anxiety or times where I'm like, ooh, like I don't want to go talk to them, or I don't want to put myself out there. But I've been in positions where I'm like, well, hell, it's my job to present to this room of 700 people. So like I'm going to get up and say what I have to say. But then afterward, that's when the introversion really comes back. We're like, ooh, you were just really like, you were speaking for an hour in front of so many people. Then the overthinking comes in. I'm like, what did they think? Did I mess up? Just what a wonderful life we live.
It's a cycle. It's a cycle. You get through it.
But it definitely is very affirming. Like you said, just knowing if I'm at Black Expression or if we're wherever we were at, and there's a bunch of stuff going on, I can make eye contact with you and see you just kind of also observing the room too. I'm like, okay, like my people are here.
Yes. Yes. The united front of not talking.
The secret introvert society. I love it. I love it so much. And so, one of the things that led to me asking you to be on the podcast was because you're someone who is very passionate about mental health. You have a lot of experience working within the realm of mental health. So, I wanted to start that conversation by asking for your origin story. I know usually we talk about origin stories of like, oh, what's Spider-Man's origin story? But I want to get to know more about when did you first find that passion for mental health and know that it was something that you wanted to pursue?
Hmm. Well, once upon a time. I'm kidding. Um, I feel like for me, mental health was one of those things that I kind of got thrown into. Um, the women in my family have a history of struggling with a lot of mental health challenges, whether it be depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, suicidality, just different things, full gambit. Um, and so it was kind of something that I had to learn about, even when I didn't necessarily care to. And then it put me in a position where I often had to like speak to a lot of doctors, a lot of doctors, a lot of nurses, a lot of therapists, a lot of different folks in the mental health field. And over time, I learned that that was just a skill that I had in terms of just being able to communicate with people and get them into a place where they feel safe, they feel calm, when they were initially feeling distressed. And then I realized that, oh shit, I have this skill and I can make a career out of that and I can get paid. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good.
And I don't know, it was one of those things where like life kind of shifted and was very iterative in that way. Like I I thought at first I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, and then I realized like, oh, I don't necessarily want to always just be giving assessments. And so then I learned, oh, I can be a therapist where I can actually have a person, human to human level relationship, where I feel like that's kind of where the deepest work for me ends up being. Um, and so yeah, that's how that worked out.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely think that, I mean, just based off our conversation about feeling safe and speaking with people, I definitely think is something that you are naturally good at. So getting paid to do that is definitely something to be proud of. And as I was preparing for this podcast episode, I thought back and I remembered that I actually went to one of your graduation ceremonies when you graduated community college, I think, or I just remember driving all the way down to what felt like 3,000 hour drive to get to Chula Vista. And I was like, in retrospect, like as I was preparing, it's like I barely even knew you, and I was over here driving to your graduation, and that's
You
what makes community important.
That's so wild. Like, wow. Wow. You really came to my graduation. I remember that. Thank
I think that's just what I understood community to be at that point in my life. I'm like, hey, this is the village. We always talk about it takes a village. This is the village. And I think you was like, hey, I'm graduating here and there. I'm like, well, guess we pulling up. Cause I think it was a few of us that were there. I don't remember who specifically, but I know a few was just pulled up. And graduation ceremonies are boring. So to
you.
sit
Really.
through all those names all the way at Southwestern, I was like, this is going to be somebody that's going to be in my life for a while because why am I at this graduation? I could be doing anything else right now.
Honestly, I've been telling everybody that if I am a fool and I go back to get my PsyD or PhD or whatever, like, please don't come to my graduation because I won't be there. Let's just have a big party. Say congratulations. You can give me some money if you feel like it. And yeah, that's it. I'm good. Doing that shit.
Yeah, if you're not going to be there, that's wild.
Mm-mm. I'd rather not. And once I found out that you could just not do that, I'm like, say yes. I'm not going.
And see, a few of so when I just got my MBA, I didn't do the like everybody graduation. I just did Black grad. And people are like, oh, you're not going to do like the Rady graduation? Like, no, why? This
Yeah,
sounds so boring. Like we did these classes together. We congratulated each other. This is good enough. I wanna see some other Black people. I wanna like do something a little bit more celebratory. And even in doing that, I kind of did Black grad because I knew my family would want to see me graduate. But if it were up to me, I probably would have just like logged off after the last class. Like, well, got my degree. Send me the paper when you feel like it.
I love it. Oh my God. I only did Black grad for my undergrad. Um, I think the school that I went to was just the school that I went to for my master's was just a little too small.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember when we did the Black graduation, I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is the only way it'll be acceptable. But everybody was just dancing in the freaking the little center of
Yeah.
the stadium or whatever. I was just like, see, this is how you're supposed to celebrate. Like,
It's exactly because after you go to a Black grad, you go to a regular graduation ceremony. You're like, ooh, this is eerie. Like this is weird.
okay, so no disrespect to all the religious folks out there and white people, but I'm sorry, I'm going to a Black church if I want to go to church because any other church just it feels like that. That's how I see it in my head. I just no, I'm good. I need to
Yeah,
party.
it's the vibe. I remember I went to one of my friends' graduation ceremonies when she got her master's in psychology,
Mhm.
and they either either one of the what happened, I don't remember exactly what happened, but either one of these is egregious. They either said the Pledge of Allegiance or sang the Star Spangled Banner at the graduation ceremony. And it was like a police officer that led it. I'm just like, I luckily it was at Pepperdine, so I was like, I'm gonna go look at the water while y'all handle all this. Oh, it was bagpipes. They played bagpipes, which is wild.
Don't bagpipes get played at like funerals or something? I, I'm confused. Never mind. I'm just my
When I heard the bagpipes coming on, I'm like, oh no, we need a black grad over here because ain't we got the drums at black grad, but we the bagpipes, nah, we not don't bring no bagpipes to my graduation ceremony.
shout out to Pepperdine.
Shout out to Pepperdine. Shout out to Alexis. I'm happy I went to your graduation, but the back and she agreed. I was texting her during this. I was like, "Are they playing bagpipes?" I'm gonna come back when they get to your psychology master's program because this. I found a nice tree to lay under. Took some pictures. Wrote some poetry. I wasn't about to sit and listen to the bagpipes and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh God.
We got a little off track there, but it is all within the realm of you pursuing these degrees and following your passion within therapy. And one of the things that I was curious about, you talk about like being naturally good at some of these things. What was that like learning about marriage and family therapy in a classroom setting, like, or just being in a formal program as opposed to just what you might naturally have or naturally bring to the table, if that makes sense?
Um, well, there's there's a lot that can be said the about learning anything in a classroom setting, right? Um, I feel like in a lot of ways it helped me to gain a new perspective of how I'm seeing a situation. Um, I I really appreciated the fact that there was a lot of opportunity for the students to kind of discuss perspectives amongst themselves based on their own histories, backgrounds, and experiences, right? And so that kind of helped me to integrate more information that was maybe outside of my own little lens, right? Um, and then I guess learning the theories kind of I had like a love-hate relationship with that because it's like that some of these things are just not going to translate across cultures, across
Right.
generations. Like a lot of these people are dead. Like their experiences are based off of what was going on back in the 70s. And you're talking about middle-aged white people and their kids. Like, I'm sorry, that's not going to always translate. And so that created a lot of friction in the classroom, which I was like, I want all the smoke, but it's okay. Um, it was a time. It was a time. I learned a lot, and I'm very grateful that I had that experience. I but I also recognize that we've got work to do in terms of just our understanding of just the variety of what the world actually reflects. And I do think that we are trying. We're just
Mm.
not, it's just not reflective of what's happening immediately in our world all the time. Um, yeah,
No, I think that resonates a lot just because even in my MBA classes, there was stuff I was like, yeah, black people can't just do it like this way. Like
yes,
this don't work for us. And I think that's why it's so important for people like us to be in these positions where we're able to yes and a lot of what we're learning. It's like, yes, like I understand this theory, I understand the history of this, and let's talk about how this differs if you're low income or differs if you're from a different cultural background because especially when you look at the stigma of therapy and mental health in black communities, there's a lot more barriers sometimes to people getting the help that they need or even just to be able to understand what it is that therapy aims to accomplish.
yeah, yeah. And I think that that's something that specifically when I'm thinking about like the mental health community and stuff, I think that we're still learning how to create that sense of safety amongst various cultures because there is such an uphill battle given our historical experiences, right?
Mhm.
So it's a lot of how do I like create a space where you feel like you're being censored? How do I show up for you in a way that makes you feel like I'm showing up for you? Because I may think that I'm doing everything that I can, but I need to invite you into that conversation and I need to figure out how I'm going to do that. And a part of that looks like me actually asking real people. And sometimes they may not always know the answer. So we're going to have to collaborate with one another and figure it out and trial and error. And sometimes we're both going to mess up. And we both need to just be aware of the fact that we're going to mess up. That's part of the relationship, you know? Um, so yeah,
I
tangent.
love that recognition of that there's going to be mistakes and that people are going to mess up and that people are people, because I know I've heard several times where somebody may go to therapy and they have that one session like, oh, well, that didn't work, so I'm never going to therapy again. Or they've have a therapist and it doesn't work out with the therapist, they never try another therapist. And I think that the more that we have these conversations, and one of the reasons why I was excited to just be able to have this conversation on the pod is because the more that we normalize these conversations and we invite people into just the space of what therapy is, I think that is just so important. Because I don't know if this resonates with you necessarily, but I know for me, sometimes when we're in these academic environments or where we're in environments where everybody's speaking the same language, you kind of get lost and assume like, oh yeah, well, everybody feels this way, everybody thinks this way. Whereas when you enter like certain communities, it's like, oh wow, like there's still a lot more education, like you said, to be done, or a lot more that needs to be developed to really build those relationships and build that trust.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've definitely fallen victim to the curse of knowledge, right? And sometimes I have to go back and check myself, right? Of making sure that I'm not assuming that somebody else knows exactly what it is that I'm talking about. And so even actively slowing those moments down where I'm asking them like, "Hey, does this make sense?" And it's totally okay if it doesn't. Sometimes I get in my head and I think that I'm making sense and yes, it makes sense in my world, but like what is this like in yours? You know? Um, yeah. And even opening up that conversation of like we are all living in our own heads. We're all experiencing our from life from our own perspectives. And I may say one thing to you and it triggers you. And I had no idea that it could trigger you. And while that's not necessarily my fault, I recognize the fact that I impacted you in this way. So let's talk about it so that we can create room for more safety and communication to occur, you know? Um, I feel like I might have went on a tangent. Ask me the question again.
Think you're right on track. I don't even remember what the original question was, but we're on track for where the conversation needed to go. And I think that's what made me fall in love with podcasting too. Sometimes like I send you the document that has questions that we'll talk about, but after a while I really just start having like I said before, sir, I'm talking to you as if it's just you and I here, because it is just you and I. And we get to the questions when we get to them, but I think that I'm feeling like I think I feel right now how you feel watching me perform poetry, because you speaking about perspective and like things that words and the power of words, because I study cognitive science. So there's just so much where I'm always thinking about thinking and thinking about like perspective. And so hearing you speak, I'm like, yeah, if I was a therapist, I feel like this is what I would be on too.
Yeah, man. It's so helpful. It's helpful to know that somebody sees us
Hmm.
and know that even if they don't necessarily see us, they're trying to see us, you know?
Hmm.
Mm, I know that for me in my experience, like some of most helpful it, the most helpful and safe places have always been the places where I knew that like I'm trying and the other person is too. And if you look at that from a evolutionary level, like that is how we have survived as human beings. And so when we are able to utilize those skills of talking to one another and actually using our voices and also getting in connection with yourself so that you can communicate exactly what it is that's coming up for you. So you're not just saying, I don't know, even though I don't know is okay. I don't know is okay. But like, yeah, just being able to create that space. I don't know why I just imagine like the vision I have is like people like throwing balls at one another and like, or you're like playing dodgeball. You can't play dodgeball if you don't have any balls to throw at that person, right? And so if you're not utilizing what you have in your gift of speaking, how is that person ever going to know what it is that's going on in your mind?
The dodgeball analogy feels a little violent for the conversation, but
It's a game.
I know. But in my head, it was like, oh yeah, like you gotta go therapy, so you have the dodgeball, so you can knock people out.
Yeah, that is kind of violent.
I followed though. I followed. You was cooking. I knew where you was going, but I just got taken back to dodgeball in like elementary school, and I just thought about just how like violently we were trying to like win games of dodgeball. But I like the analogy. I also could see like the therapy gears turning in your brain as you're like picking the words you're saying. Because even when you say "I don't know" and then you caught yourself like "I don't know" is okay. Like I think that's such a like therapist or somebody who's very cognizant of the power of language, and I just love seeing it. Like you said, it's mirroring. Because I'm like, yeah, I'd be thinking about this stuff too. Or yeah, the brain is such an interesting place, and it's so unexplored.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that the brain is such an interesting place, and as interesting of a place as it has been, I think it's the most centered in the Western world. But
Mm,
I feel like the when we're talking about certain activations or triggers, things like this, I think it's helpful to remember we're not talking about the brain, or at least like the upstairs frontal lobe part of the brain, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about the body, you know, and being able to, at least my goal with my clients and with the people that I want to work with, my goal is to help them to integrate that brain body connection, you know, because when we are in those spaces of not feeling safe, that is literally our body going into fight flight mode, you know? And so when we can get that the top and the bottom to integrate and connect with one another and understand that, hey, I'm actually in this space right now. This person may have said something that activated me, and I'm going to be okay. You
mm.
know,
Oh,
it's,
absolutely.
yeah. So thoughts are bouncing around every which way. So I'm just leave it there.
Hey, I had an aha moment as you said that. I was like, huh, brain. Because as soon as you said like brain, like centering the brain is a very Western view, that reminded me just how many other things that we're taught or that we uh, become routine or we think is normal is a very Westernized view of things, which is why it's so important for people like you to have like a platform to be able to say like this for longer than 30 seconds. Because like yeah, it's just so true. Like when you think of ourselves as systems and the brain is part of that system. That's why through this podcast, I've wanted to speak to people who aren't the famous TikTok rappers with millions of followers. Like I want to speak to people doing things that not that rap doesn't matter, but doing other things that matter. Because talking to a person who does yoga, they're going to talk to you about the body and just about how to check in with different parts of your body. And I think thinking through the brain as part of the system with your body and the fight or flight response, that was helpful for me. Like even the little overthinking I've been doing this morning, I'm like, oh yeah, that's just my body like adjusting to this new normal. Because I've been telling people when they ask, oh, like, what's next when you get to LA? What's next? What's next? I'm like, yo, I'm about to chill for a minute. I just moved to a whole new city. I'm chilling.
I love the fact that you did that and you were very cognizant of this transition, right? I think sometimes, particularly as Black people, like we have a way of just kind of powering through it, right? And we pride ourselves on that. Like we, no matter what, I'm always get up, get it out the mud, right? And I'm like, okay, that's great. And your body is designed to rest. Please. I'm not saying that you can't have periods where you're going hard. That's great. But like there has to be that ebb and flow of being able to like power up and do what you need to do and then being able to slow down. And it's not one or the other. And I think that when we're talking about like TikTokers or we're talking about TikTok therapy specifically, no, no shade to that, just just something to keep in mind. The body is not meant to do one thing. The brain is not meant to do one thing. And we're supposed to be able to like speed up and slow down and have the ability to constantly adjust and flow. And when we don't have that skill, that's usually because something happened in our experience that tells us that we have to stay wherever it is that we are. Um, I don't believe that.
See, I got you preaching on this Saturday morning. But you mentioned TikTok therapy, and I know you said no shade to TikTok therapy, but I do want to follow that thread a little bit, just because I think that social media obviously sometimes is a gift, sometimes it's the most cursiest of curses that has ever existed. And when it comes to things like quote unquote TikTok therapy, sometimes I'm scrolling on social media, I'm like, oh, that's really dope that people can digest this in this bite-sized manner. But then the other side of my brain, sometimes if I scroll and a few other posts, I'm like, ooh, this person is not qualified to be just giving y'all this mumbo jumbo about what they're quantifying as therapy. So from your perspective, obviously you're not speaking for all therapists everywhere, but as someone who has some more experience in an educational way and more experience in a practical way within the realm of therapy, what is your opinion on like TikTok therapy or just how people get a lot of their mental health tips or tricks from social media? No, that wasn't a scripted question, so
No, it
take.
wasn't. And so now I'm really thinking. um, I think that like anything else in the world, it could be good or it could be bad. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing, right? Um, and I was having this conversation with one of my supervisors the other day, actually, and I told her the way I see like a lot of this social media information that gets put out there, I would the same way that you see, like, say you have some sort of physical ailment, right? And you see a commercial and they're advertising medication. And you're like, oh, I have X, Y, and Z, and none of the medications that I've taken have worked, right? I'm going to take this medication that I've seen on TV and bring it to my doctor who knows what I need because they've been working with me for I don't know how long. And based off of my experiences, my this, my that, it we can't always assume that every single thing that everybody shares with us is going to work for us
Mm,
because it worked just because it worked for them. You know what I
mm,
mean? So I would say take what you're seeing. If you like something that has popped up on your feed or whatever and you think that it's interesting, I would say, okay, if you have a therapist, share what you've seen with your therapist and be like, hey, I think I'd like to try X, Y, and Z. Can we integrate that into the work that we're doing? And if they have the skill to be able to do that, then that's great. And if not, then I'm sure they can refer you to somebody who does have X, Y, and Z, whether that be EMDR or whatever, right? If it's something that's a little bit more, I guess, just outside the realm of therapy or whatever, I would say go talk to a practitioner of that particular realm and let them get to know your experience and don't assume that just because this person did this one thing, because I'm pretty sure that they've probably done about 15,000 other things, their life experience is a little bit different than yours, and yeah, just because it worked for one person doesn't always mean it's gonna work for you, but it doesn't mean that nothing's gonna work for you. Something
I think that's a perfect answer to that. I think you've given a lot of gems in this little mental health corner that we have. I think my final question with regards to therapy, if I was listening to this podcast and maybe I haven't been to therapy for a while or I haven't tried therapy before, what would
Mhm.
be some advice that you would give to someone who's trying to seek therapy or try therapy for the first time?
I would say treat therapy like dating in the sense of like the first therapist that you meet might not be the one, but it doesn't mean that you can't find the one. And you have to be open to building that relationship with that person. And I would say be honest with them about what's going on. It is their job to handle whatever it is that you're bringing to the table. And if they recognize that this might be out of their scope, then it is their job to get you in connection with somebody who might be a better fit for you. But they can't do that if they don't know that.
Of that. And
And
for
medications. If you're taking any medications or using any drugs, please tell them. It helps. It helps. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, be honest with people that's trying to take care of you. Like stop hiding from your doctor, stop hiding from your dentist, stop hiding from your therapist. Like these people are trained to help and they want what's best for you. Like I don't know why people be lying. Like don't be lying. But Ebony, you've been very gracious with all of your knowledge with regards to therapy, and I think that a lot of folks are going to listen to this and come walk away with at least a better understanding of some of the depths of therapy. Like I think just getting an insight into the mind of someone who practices therapy and who is educated in this realm, I think is very important. There's one other category, not category, one other facet of your life I want to make sure we left time to talk about on the podcast, and that is being a doula, which I don't know if I knew you were a doula until I clicked on your Instagram bio, and it was right there for everyone to see. Um, and if I've been thinking about this since I've been prepared for this question, I feel like I might have had someone else on the podcast who is a doula, but I know being a doula has at least been brought up on the podcast. But for those who might not be familiar, can you first explain what a doula is and then talk a little bit about what made you want to pursue being a doula?
So a doula is someone who is helping someone, a birthing person who is going through the process of bringing baby into the world, right? And that can sometimes that can sometimes doulas give assistance to um, women who are going through pregnancy, right? In the beginning stages, helping them develop a birthing plan, helping them to understand like what are some of the challenges that they might face, helping them to communicate with doctors, helping them learn more about like what's going on with their bodies during pregnancy, and having just more conversations about what the process of pregnancy and after birth could look like, right? Um, and then for me, why I got into it was actually because of my lovely sister friend, Sakia, when she was in the process of going through birthing her son. Um, I lived with her for about 2 years, and during that time, she got pregnant with her son Zion, and I got to watch like firsthand her going through the process of pregnancy from first trimester to birth. And I realized how much of a huge transition that was for her. And just it made me so curious about how women sometimes struggle and sometimes have wonderful, easy pregnancies. And and seeing the birthing process and how long it actually takes. And then also like there's so much information that you gain that is needed and necessary, and to be able to be a support to another person who is going through one of the most vulnerable, challenging times of their life. Like, I would love to be a part of that if I can. And if I can be supportive to that, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. Mm. So, yeah, that's why I became a doula.
Yeah, and I think that as someone who had no idea what a doula was for the longest, I think the more that I encounter people who this is something that they're passionate about, or this is something I want to pursue, I like just highlighting those original stories of when they first started to become interested, because I think that helps people just get more knowledge on like why someone might want to be a doula, what being a doula is. And I remember my friend Tiana, she was a doula, and I recorded a podcast episode with her where she talked a lot about it, and it just amazes me. It doesn't really amaze me, but it amazes me just how little we really are educated about such a big facet of literal life, like the origin of life. Like, this is when life starts for people, and we don't have knowledge about all that women or birthing people go through when they are giving birth. We don't have a lot of knowledge of the disparities between what it's like if a white woman is going to hospital in that birthing process versus if someone who identifies as a black woman goes into that process. Even the concept of using the term birthing people versus like woman, like, I think these are all conversations that I have been exposed to in college and have a deep rooted understanding and education around the context for. But just understanding that the listeners of the Banquet Hall pod, not everyone who listens to this podcast went to college, not everyone who listens to this podcast is exposed to these different career and passions. So I just always like listening and getting more of an understanding on like when people have these original thoughts and original ideas for what they might want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for being on a podcast, an introverted podcast. I didn't know if we were going to spend more time on this podcast talking about being an introvert or talking about mental health, but I feel like we've done a great job at accomplishing both so far. And as we get into the tail half of the podcast, just a few more questions about Ebony, the person, before we get into kind of recommendation corner and whatnot. First things first, as one of many people I've met through the art community, for lack of a better umbrella term, in San Diego, I was curious, do you yourself identify as a creative person or as an artist even?
I wouldn't necessarily call myself an artist, but I would call myself a creative. I feel like I bring a lot of creativity to the work that I do. Um, and I'm looking to bring more creativity in back into my life. I feel like grad school definitely sucked that out of me. Um,
About it.
but but yeah, I'm looking to bring more creativity back into just different areas of my life, and I like that.
I like that. I feel like there's so much underneath that. I like that. I saw the stories forming behind your eyes when you're like, I like that. So like there's a lot to that.
Yes, there was. There was. I'm just excited to just be in this new chapter of just feeling like I can breathe and not
Mm.
being in school, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
'cause boy, do grad school have our lungs just like this sometimes.
truly, truly. I'm ready. I'm happy to just be able to have the freedom to do what I want with my time again. And the creativity aspect of things is definitely something that's
I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what new endeavors and refound endeavors birth from this place of pursuing creativity in this next chapter. We have a lot more time to breathe and just do what you need to do. And speaking of breathing, what is your Zen place? And this is either a physical place or just a set of circumstances that bring you to this peaceful state of mind where you can relax, you can breathe. How do you create your Zen place?
I feel like my Zen place is less of a specific place and it's more like a time.
Mm,
So it's for me, it's early in the morning when literally nobody else is up. And just and I don't always, like, do this, but when I can and I do have the time, I like to do my meditation, my lemon water in the morning, and then I like to go out on my morning walks. Um, I feel like that time and getting to do those activities has been probably my most zenned out space, which I have not done in a while. I need to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's that.
I feel
What's
like
your zen place?
the curiosity I see. My Zen place is near any body of water. I think first and foremost, like there's just something about being near water, whether it's like still water or if it's the ocean. I just like even when it's raining and everybody's like, "Oh, the weather sucks." I'm like, "Oh, this is perfect." Like there's water. Um, yeah, I just like the sound of water. I like the stillness of water. It just brings me to a very meditative place, and I feel like I always inspired to write when I'm near water. I also echo the morning time though as just kind of like a zone of zen because there's something special about the early mornings when you know most people are still asleep and going to be asleep for a few hours. The stores are less crowded. You could go for a walk. Like I love the mornings. I'm definitely a morning person, and I feel like the last few months I've kind of gotten back into fully being a morning person. I think I got caught up in like, oh, well, none of my friends are up, so let me just relax. But like getting up, taking walks, or just being ready to do whatever. Like even this morning, I was up for a few hours before we started recording the podcast, so I got to get a day started, do this, and still have plenty of day left. So, yeah, anywhere near water, the morning time, movie theaters are also another zen place. I love going to the movies. I love it.
I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's why I started including this question in the podcast because I think that the more that we hear like what brings other people to a place is in, I think we can pick and choose what we can apply to our lives as well.
Yeah.
Because whether it's going on a morning walk or people that start every day with a cup of tea, like somebody might listen to this podcast like, huh, let me try that to see if that works for me.
Yeah. Need more zen.
Definitely need more zen in the world. Let's go to inspiration corner. Who are some people, and don't feel the need to name every single person. People listening to this, if you don't get named, it's totally fine. It's just a question on a podcast. But who are some people, either people you know or people you don't know, who have inspired and or influenced you?
Um, my mentor, her name is Dr. Rachel Hastings, and she's definitely been a huge influence in my life and the a lot of the choices that I've made. I feel like in a lot of ways she brought me out of my shell. Um, I feel like it's gonna sound really weird, but or really cheesy rather, but one of my high school teachers, her name was Sandra Masashi. And honestly, she was probably one of the most pivotal people in my life because I think
Mm,
that I probably would have never gone to school, like never even done community college or anything beyond high school if it wasn't for her. Um, and I remember telling her like I'm not applying to schools, and she literally stopped everything that she was doing and went over to the other side of the school and was like, "You're coming with me. You're applying to schools." And yeah, in a lot of ways, she saved my life.
mm.
Um, and I'll forever be grateful for that. So those are the people that I can think of off the top of my head. So
And I don't think that's cheesy at all. I think that there's so many people who maybe their label is just a high school teacher, but you never know those repeated interactions and how much that can mean for a person. Because even for myself, there's a few high school teachers that I think of where I'm like, hey, this is the person who like installed my love for writing. Like if it wasn't for people like Mr. Franklin or Miss McDormand or Miss Williams, I don't know if I would care about writing that much, but they saw like a writer in me and were able to help blossom that. So shout out to good high school teachers and good educators in general.
truly.
Outside of what we have discussed, what else do people need to know about Ebony to get a complete picture of who you are? Obviously, as complete as an introvert would allow anybody to get of a picture.
Um, to get to know the complete picture of me would be to, I don't know, ask me a question. I
I love that
don't
answer.
mind answering. Just ask me a question.
See, that's my life MO too. And people look at me so weird, like, yeah, just ask. Like, I will tell you, but I'm not just about to volunteer every single thing about me.
There you go.
I love that. Where can people find you and how can people support you?
You can find me at ResIrie on Instagram. And how can you support me? So I'm currently acting as a creative director for this Digit Just Us program, in conjunction with my um, mentor, Dr. Rachel Hastings. And we are creating a program where we're helping people to gain more education around just becoming just more tech savvy in like the digital spaces, and being able to help them start online an online business, and being able to give them the tools necessary to understand how to communicate amongst these platforms in an effective and clear way. And my work specifically is working on the interpersonal side and working through and helping people to understand different aspects of interpersonal relationships. So if you want to support me and you also want to support yourself and you want to learn more aspects of that, you can go to the Digit Instagram, and I can send you all of the links to that as well. And yeah, if you have any questions about anything I talked about today, just send me a DM. I don't mind.
Awesome. Shameless plug, shout out to manifestation. It sounds like you already got a shameless plug in there, but anybody else or anything else you want to shout out or manifest on the pod?
Um, I think that's it for now.
That's it for now. All good. And then almost at the end, takeaways slash lessons learned. So, what are some takeaways that you're taking away from this episode, as well as what do you hope our listeners are taking away from this episode after listening to our conversation?
What I'm taking away from this is that Kyler creates dope safe spaces for people to be themselves, and I appreciate that. And for the listeners, I'm hoping that you guys will create your own spaces where you can be yourself. You're Evan.
Mm, I love that. I would say that my takeaway from this episode is that the human body is a magnificent just creation. Thinking through our conversation on mental health and how brain and body work together, thinking through how we use language, how we invite people to feel safe in a holistic manner. Like it's just really beautiful to think about how we as humans just navigate this place. And also that there are people who also see the world similarly to you. Because I swear sometimes I'll be talking to people and I'm like, are you not thinking about the layers of how this impacts the brain and the mind? And they're like, no, you're crazy. But then I speak to people like you, I'm like, yeah, there's good people left in this world.
I see you. I see you, Kyler.
And I do feel seen. But then last question I have for you, Ebony. Do you have any recommendations? And recommendation corner, this is what I like this corner for is for people to either get a book, a podcast, a movie, a song, any piece of content that you feel would either match the theme of our conversation, kind of thinking about mental health, or just something where you're like, hey, I just rock with this, and I think more people should rock with this. Like for me, like if I were on the other side of this chair and I didn't have like this powerful recommendation, I might just say everyone needs to watch the Lego Batman movie because that's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my life, and not enough people have seen it. But what recommendation would you leave our listeners with?
That's hilarious. So I would recommend. If you haven't read the book already, you can read the book The Body Keeps Score. Just in alignment with the conversation about the brain body connection. Another book recommendation around that would also be Call of the Wild by Kimberly Johnson, I want to say her name is. She does a lot of somatic work, helping people to navigate and work through trauma in utilizing somatic um, body work. Yeah.
Perfect recommendations. And then, as promised earlier in the podcast, going back to the most played movie in my movie theater, I
Yes.
think that I have a few. I think Transformers will probably be the number one played movie in that movie theater. Either Transformers or Iron Man, honestly, because I think it just has to be some type of action movie that we're talking dream house. So I'm assuming I have a family, kids now. My kids got friends. So when the kids like, Dad, what movie did you really like when you were a kid? I'm gonna turn on Transformers and I'm gonna be like, y'all didn't know about Shia LaBeouf. Y'all didn't know about Megan Fox. Y'all don't know about Optimus Prime. Like I get y'all got all these AI and virtual reality creations, but what y'all know about my dude Michael Bay and these Transformers explosions? That's gonna be the most played one. But some other contenders. Iron Man because they need to know how the MCU began. Like they need to know the moment in time we
Okay.
were in. So those are my action picks. My comedy picks, because I mentioned Lego Batman, I feel like Lego Batman is going to be one of those cult classic movies where people are going to judge me and I'm like, they're like, I don't want to watch no Lego Batman. And I'm gonna say, trust me, we go to the theater, I play Lego Batman, and then they're busting up laughing and we're having a great time. Um, Bottoms, which is a newer movie, and that came out last year. It stars Io from The Bear. Fantastic comedy. It's like the perfect intellectual raunchy 2023 comedy. Like everyone I recommended to watch Bottoms, they love it. So I feel like that's going to be one of those movies that's kind of lost to time where I'm like, nah, like y'all know nothing about Bottoms.
I'm
Highly
gonna
recommend Bottoms.
I'm
If you
adding
watch Bottoms, I expect a text from you 20 minutes into that movie where like this movie is hilarious.
gotcha.
Especially, I feel like you will really like Bottoms.
Good.
And then I had to throw a not problematic fave in there, but Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby. One of the funniest movies to ever exist. Has it aged the best? Absolutely not. But Talladega Nights is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my entire life.
Okay. Okay.
So those are the five movies that is going to be in the theater. I'm sure I can name plenty, like Avengers Endgame. There's a lot of movies out there, but if I had to pick some just purely Kyler movies, those are going to be five. That's like y'all got to watch these.
Bet. Say less.
Well, Ebony, you've been so gracious with your time, so definitely want to thank you for trusting the Banquet Hall to tell your story and to be a guest on. Listeners, I hope y'all enjoyed our conversation. This is your first time. Make sure y'all, one, follow the podcast on social media at Banquet Hall Pod. Two, we gave y'all 5-star content. Leave a 5-star rating, leave a like. And three, most importantly, make sure you share this podcast with a friend. Share it with somebody that you care about. Share with somebody who you thought of throughout this episode. And let's just get these stories more amplified. Y'all came for Ebony's stories, but make sure y'all stick around for some of the other stories on the pod too. And then, Ebony, any last words before we close out the episode?
No. I think all the words have been said.
All the words have been said. We have exceeded the introverted word quota for this Saturday. Now, Ebony and I are going to go off and not speak to another human for another couple of hours. But I think this episode was fantastic, Ebony. So thank you so much for your time. And listeners, we'll catch y'all next time.
Thank you. Bye.